is the mind of a man who finds in his dog what he cannot find in people. You see it in the way he looks at the animal, not the casual affection of a pet owner. Something deeper, something that borders on desperation. His hand rests on the dog's head longer than necessary. His voice changes when he speaks to it, softer, more vulnerable than it ever is with humans. And when the dog leaves the room, something in him dims. He tells himself it's normal. Everyone loves their dog. But late at night, when he's alone with his thoughts, he knows the truth. This isn't love. This is dependency. This is need dressed up as companionship. The dog doesn't judge him, doesn't expect him to be more than he is, doesn't leave when he fails, doesn't grow tired of his presence. And somewhere along the way, that unconditional acceptance became the only kind of connection he trusts. Such is the mind that replaced human complexity with canine simplicity and called it peace. But here's what he doesn't say out loud. He's terrified. Not of losing the dog, though that fear is real. He's terrified of what it means that the dog has become his primary relationship. That he checks his phone less for messages from friends and more to see the camera feed of his dog sleeping at home. That he rushes through social events to get back to the one being that makes him feel truly seen. And the most disturbing part? He prefers it this way. People ask too much. They want reciprocity. They want him to show up consistently, to remember details, to navigate the exhausting complexity of human emotion. They want vulnerability but punish weakness. They want authenticity but reject the parts of him that don't fit their narrative. The dog wants nothing but his presence. So he gives it everything. The pattern emerges in the small choices that accumulate into a life. He stops accepting invitations. I can't leave the dog alone that long. He avoids relationships. It's not fair to the dog to divide my attention. He structures his entire existence around the animal's needs and tells himself this is responsibility. This is love. This is what good people do. But watch him closely. Watch what happens when someone suggests he get a dog sitter. Watch the flash of panic, the immediate justifications. He has separation anxiety. He won't eat for strangers. He needs me. And beneath those words lives the truth he cannot speak. I need him. Harry Harlow's experiments with infant monkeys revealed something devastating about attachment. When given the choice between a wire mother that provided food and a cloth mother that provided comfort, the infants chose comfort. They would rather starve with softness than eat with coldness. Harry Harlow's experiments with infant monkeys revealed something devastating about attachment. When given the choice between a wire mother that provided food and a cloth mother that provided comfort, the infants chose comfort. They would rather starve with softness than eat with coldness. This man is that infant decades later, still choosing the comfort that asks nothing of him over the nourishment that requires vulnerability. His dog provides what psychologists call a secure base, a safe haven from which to face the world. But somewhere along the way, the base became the entire world. The haven became a hiding place. John Bowlby, who pioneered attachment theory, understood that healthy attachment creates the capacity for exploration. The securely attached child ventures out because they know they can return. But this man doesn't venture out. He returns before he's even left. Such is the mind that confused safety with imprisonment. And people notice. They comment on how much he talks about his dog. How every conversation somehow circles back to the animal. How his phone's photo library is a monument to one relationship. They joke about it, gently at first. You two are inseparable. But underneath the humor lives a question nobody asks directly. Is this healthy? He hears the question anyway, and it enrages him. Because they don't understand. They can't understand. They haven't experienced the specific loneliness of being surrounded by people and feeling completely alone. They haven't learned that human connection requires a performance he's too exhausted to give. They haven't discovered that the only relationship without disappointment is the one where expectations are this simple. Walk me, feed me, be here. The roots grow in soil most people never examine. Freud would recognize this immediately, the repetition of an early wound. Somewhere in this man's history, human connection became associated with pain. Perhaps a parent who loved conditionally, perhaps friends who abandoned him when he needed them most. Perhaps a series of relationships where his authentic self was rejected, quietly or violently, until he learned to hide it completely. The child who learns that love is unreliable develops what attachment theorists call insecure attachment. And that insecurity follows them into adulthood, shaping every relationship, every connection, every attempt at intimacy. But dogs don't trigger that wound. Dogs don't have the capacity to reject him the way humans did. They don't grow bored with his stories or irritated by his needs. They don't compare him to others or find him lacking. They exist in a kind of eternal present where he is always enough, exactly as he is. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate the social world. And for this man, the persona required by human relationships became unbearably heavy. The constant monitoring of what to say, how to act, when to reveal, when to conceal. The exhausting mathematics of reciprocity and social debt. With the dog, he could drop the mask completely. And in that dropping, he found something he'd been seeking his entire life. Acceptance without performance. Love without condition. Presence without judgment. The problem is that he's built his entire emotional architecture on a foundation that cannot hold the weight of a human life. Because the dog will age, will slow down, will eventually die. And when it does, he won't just lose a pet. He'll lose the only relationship where he felt safe enough to be himself. Such is the mind that chose a love with an expiration date because it felt safer than risking the infinite complexity of human connection. And here's the mechanism that keeps him trapped. Every time he chooses the dog over human interaction, he reinforces the neural pathway that says, "This is where safety lives." Every time he cancels plans to stay home, he strengthens the belief that people are unreliable and animals are not. Every time he invests emotional energy into the dog instead of cultivating human relationships, he proves to himself that he was right to withdraw. Behavioral psychology calls this operant conditioning. The behavior that gets rewarded gets repeated, and the dog rewards him constantly. Tail wags, excited greetings, unconditional affection. Meanwhile, human relationships feel like punishment, rejection, misunderstanding, the slow death of feeling unseen. So of course he chooses the dog. But here's what he doesn't see. He's not just avoiding pain, he's avoiding growth. Because human relationships, for all their difficulty, are the crucible where we become more than we are, where we learn to hold complexity, where we develop the capacity to be hurt and stay anyway, where we discover that vulnerability isn't weakness but the only path to genuine connection. The dog loves him unconditionally, yes. But unconditional love from a being incapable of judgment isn't the same as being chosen by someone who sees your flaws and stays anyway. Erich Fromm distinguished between immature love, which says, "I love you because I need you," and mature love, which says, "I need you because I love you." This man's relationship with his dog is the former, and he knows it. Late at night, when honesty creeps in, he knows the dog isn't filling a need. The dog is the need. Such is the mind that mistakes dependency for devotion. Friends have tried to reach him, gently suggested he might be isolating too much. invited him to events with the explicit promise they'll keep it short so he can get back to the dog. They've adapted to his limitations, bent themselves around his boundaries, and still he pulls away. Because their care feels like pressure, their concern feels like judgment, their invitations feel like demands he can't meet. The dog demands nothing but his presence, and he gives it gladly, grateful for a relationship where he doesn't have to be more than he is. But he is becoming less than he is. The shift begins not with realization, but with a single terrible question. He's watching the dog sleep, and the question arrives unbidden. What happens when you're gone? Not to him, to the dog. Who will the dog attach to? Who will provide this same quality of presence? Who will understand the specific way the dog needs to be touched, spoken to, cared for? And beneath that concern lives another, more frightening recognition. He's created a mutual dependency. The dog needs him in the same way he needs the dog. Two beings locked in a symbiosis that isolates them both from the larger world. This is when the first crack appears in his certainty. Because if he truly loves this animal, if this attachment is as pure as he believes, then he has to confront an uncomfortable truth. He's made the dog as dependent on him as he is on the dog. And that's not love. That's possession dressed in the language of care. Viktor Frankl wrote about the will to meaning, the human need to find purpose beyond ourselves. And this man found purpose in being needed by something that cannot survive without him. But meaning derived solely from being indispensable is fragile because it requires the other to remain dependent. Healthy love creates autonomy. Unhealthy love requires helplessness. And he's beginning to see which one he's created. This doesn't mean he loves the dog less. It means he's starting to see the attachment for what it is. A beautiful, painful compensation for wounds he hasn't healed. A relationship he's elevated to the status of religion because it asked so little of the parts of him that feel broken. Such is the mind that mistakes the absence of challenge for the presence of peace. The insight doesn't arrive as revelation. It arrives as a slow, uncomfortable awareness that spreads through him over days and weeks. He notices how much of his identity has become the guy with the dog, how conversations with strangers immediately shift to the animal, how he's become one-dimensional in his relating, as if the dog is the only interesting thing about him. And maybe it is. Maybe he's let everything else atrophy. Integration doesn't mean abandoning the dog or forcing himself into human relationships he doesn't want. It means standing in the full truth of what this attachment represents. The dog is not just a pet. It's a sanctuary from a world that hurt him. A relationship he can control in ways he could never control human connection. A love that asks nothing of the parts of himself he's learned to hide. And that's okay. That's human. But it's also a limitation he can acknowledge without shame. D.W. Winnicott wrote about the good enough mother, the parent who doesn't have to be perfect but has to be present and responsive. Perhaps what this man needs isn't perfect human relationships but good enough ones. Connections that don't require constant performance but do ask him to show up as more than just the guy with the dog. The dog can remain central. The attachment can remain strong. But it doesn't have to be exclusive. It doesn't have to be his only source of connection and meaning. This requires something difficult, grieving what he lost before the dog. The human connections that failed him. The trust that was broken. The vulnerability that was punished. He can't heal those wounds by avoiding them. He can only heal them by acknowledging they exist and that they shaped this current pattern. The dog didn't create his isolation. The dog provided comfort within an isolation that already existed. And recognizing that distinction changes everything. Because it means the problem isn't the dog. The problem is the wound the dog is soothing. And while the dog can provide temporary relief, it cannot provide healing. Only he can do that. And only by slowly, carefully, painfully re-engaging with the human world he's been avoiding. Such is the mind that discovers that the opposite of attachment isn't detachment but expansion. This doesn't look like dramatic change. It looks like small, uncomfortable steps. Saying yes to one invitation per month. Having one conversation where he doesn't mention the dog. Sitting with the anxiety of leaving the animal for an afternoon and discovering both of them survive. It looks like allowing other people to matter. Not as much as the dog matters, but enough to create a life that isn't built entirely on one fragile foundation. James Hollis teaches that the second half of life asks us to carry our contradictions. To be the person who loves his dog deeply and knows that love is a compensation. To be the person who found safety in simplicity and is willing to risk the complexity of human connection again. The dog doesn't need to become less important. The man needs to become more whole. Understanding doesn't erase the attachment, but it does reveal its true nature. He will always love this dog more than most people love their pets. That bond is real. That comfort is genuine. That relationship has saved him in ways he can't fully articulate. But he's also starting to see the cost. The friendships that faded because he couldn't show up. The romantic relationships that never began because he was already emotionally occupied. The experiences he missed because the dog couldn't come along. The version of himself that atrophied because the dog only needed one dimension of who he is. And he's learning to hold both truths simultaneously. The dog gave him something precious, and the dog cannot give him everything he needs. This is the work of integration. Not choosing between the dog and the world, but finding a way to honor both. To let the dog remain his sanctuary while slowly building other sources of connection and meaning. Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage." The dragon isn't the dog. The dragon is his fear of human rejection, and the dog has been his way of avoiding that dragon entirely. But avoidance isn't victory. Avoidance is just postponement. And somewhere inside him, he knows this. Knows that the attachment he's built, while beautiful, is also a kind of surrender. A giving up on the possibility that humans might surprise him. That connection might not always hurt. That he might be capable of the vulnerability required for deeper intimacy. Such is the mind of a man who loved his dog so completely because loving humans felt impossible. And maybe that's where he needs to start. Not by loving the dog less, but by getting curious about why human love feels so dangerous. What happened that made simplicity feel safer than complexity? When did he decide that being needed by something dependent was better than being chosen by something free? The answers won't fix him. Won't make the attachment disappear. Won't suddenly transform him into someone who finds human connection easy. But they might give him the courage to try again, to risk again, to believe that maybe, just maybe, there's room in his life for both. For the dog who asks nothing and the people who ask everything. For the relationship that feels safe and the relationships that feel terrifying. For the love that saved him and the love that might complete him. The dog will still be there when he gets home. Tail wagging, eyes bright, offering the same unconditional acceptance it always has. But maybe now he'll be there too. Not just the part of him that feels safe enough to show, but more of who he actually is. And maybe that's enough. Such is the mind that learned the hardest lesson. The love that asks nothing of you gives you nothing to grow into. The dog remains. The attachment remains. But something has shifted. He's no longer hiding in the relationship. He's using it as a foundation to venture out from, the way healthy attachment was always meant to work. And when he returns, the dog is there, always there, exactly as he needs it to be. But now he's beginning to need other things too. And that's not betrayal. That's becoming human again.